Yeah, the only mention of the UNESCO Copper Coast Geopark is in the fact that my sort of co-author with this is Dr. Mike Sweeney, who's a retired geologist and lives down in Dungarvan, but he is also a mineral collector, actually at a much higher end of things than I am. And between the two of us, we were lucky enough to get in and study this new find in Connemara. Okay, I'm just going to go through one thing there is why world class? I mean, we have some good mineral localities in Ireland. Some of the ones you may have heard of, things like Tina Mine in County Galway. There's lots of, it's copper, lead and zinc mines, some silver, and there's lots of nice microminerals as well as a few half decent macro-sized specimens. Then we have the Mogul Mountains in County Down. The word muralitic cavities, don't worry about the title there. They're basically cavities inside the granite where you get well-formed crystals, mainly of the granite minerals, which you expect quartz, feldspar, and mica, but you also get things like aquamarine and topaz in those. I've put the whole of the Antrim basalts in there because they do have some kind of world renown anyway for being a locality where we find these hydrated silicates. A lot of them are called zeolites. A lot of you may have heard also of the Kerry diamonds. So basically, the Kerry diamond itself means a quartz crystal that is terminated at both ends. So it looks a bit like a diamond, but these are just really nice clusters of clear quartz crystals or rock crystal. And we also have, because of the amount of limestone we have country, we have a number of quarries that produce, pretty decent calcite specimens, but none of them can be considered world class. World class is usually something that, or a locality in the world where the minerals are wanted by museums and collectors the world over as part of their main collections. We have one other world-class site, that is the Mogul Mine at Silver Mines in County Tip, and that produced mainly galena and sphalerite, which was back in the 1970s. I think a guy called Richard Barstow found out about this small area in the mine that produced these remarkable specimens, which the miners had all taken home with them. And he bought them off the miners and then sold them, and you'll find them in collections all over the world. Right. Just to show you a few pretty pictures. Now, just to say, this is pretty much a pictorial run through the whole thing. I'm not going to get into too much geology or theory or anything like that. This is just a nice sort of look at all the pretty things that we can get. So I've just thrown a few images there of some of the minerals you could get at some of these localities in Ireland before we move on to what we get at Larkins Quarry. So Tina Mine is well known for its azurite, which I presume you can see my, does the hand move on there, guys? You can see the icon moving around. Yes, Betty?
Yes.
Oh, Liz, yes. Can you see that moving around?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, good, because there's no point in me pointing at things if you can't see the cursor moving around. So yeah, things like azurite here, we've got malachite, they're both hydrated copper carbonates. You've got some really nice, this mineral here, which is cerussite, which is lead carbonate. In fact, at the mine, they actually found bits of cerussite, slabs of this mineral, the size of tabletops. So they did produce some pretty whacking specimens originally, but unfortunately, most of those just went into the crusher. Another micro mineral there, nice one called scorodite, and there's another pretty one over here called mimetite. They're both arsenates. I hear music. The mountains, I mentioned these cavities that you get in the Mourns granite there. We have nice smoky quartz. There's two types of feldspar here. The big chunky white ones are Orthoclase or potassium feldspars, and then these sort of stepped ones in between are plagioclase feldspars. And this is muscovite mica, but in nice crystalline form. One of the things that made the Mourne Mountains so special was the fact that it's also produced some really nice things like topaz, which is a gem crystal, and also aquamarine. You can still find bits and pieces like this if you're lucky. Maybe not quite this good. This one's in the British Museum, but you can still get there and collect stuff from the Mournes. A few examples of things from the Antrim basalts. As I say, these are usually hydrated silicates, and the zeolite group is the sort of main group that you get. And there's just a few examples here of the variety of really interesting crystals that you can get in the Antrim basalts. And you can get really into these things, the zeolites and the other minerals. I know some people who dedicate their sort of entire life just to collecting these. Here's an example of Kerry diamonds. Now, some of you may have already been down to the Dingle Peninsula and got some nice quartz specimens from there. This is one I think was sold from a group that were collected a few years ago. And you can see what I'm talking about with doubly terminated. So in other words, the crystal faces at the end are produced on one side and on the other side. So these were known as Kerry diamonds. And that's a particularly nice example. Right, the world class. So going on to Mogul Mine in Tipperary, these are a couple of the specimens. They're really hard to photograph. I don't have any myself because they're way too expensive to purchase. But the people and museums that do have them, they are quite difficult to photograph. As I said, the world's most renowned mineral photographer at the moment is Jeff Scoville, and this is one of his in the middle here. And what the Mogul are renowned for are the particularly fresh nature and superb crystals of galena, which you can see across the top here. That's lead sulfide. And then they're associated with these sort of nice, rich, dark, reddy brown sphalerite, which is zinc sulfide. You can see a separate specimen over here of sphalerite, another one over here. This is the nice galena crystals with some pyrite in between. There we go. Okay, so the main mineral at Larkins Quarry, and the one that got people all excited, was fluoride. That's calcium fluoride. And we have other localities in Ireland where you can find fluoride. You get some in the Carboniferous limestone. There's a couple of mines I mentioned there. There's Glengowla mine. That's Keith Gagan's mine in Galway. The Sheshadonnell mine, which is on the Burren. And there's a few other mines around the place in the Carboniferous limestone. What I've said there, unlike the UK, is the UK has some world-class fluorite deposits in the Carboniferous limestone, in sort of Weardale regions and things like that. But we had nothing of the sort. So just a couple of specimens I put in there. This one down here is quite nice. I mean, it's not the best looking fluorite in the world, but that's the purple mineral. But this is associated with a really nice zinc carbonate, which is smithsonite, which is lovely and yellow. That's from the amount of cadmium that's actually in it. This one up above is a specimen that's in the Galway Museum, the UCG Museum. And this is nice octahedrons of sort of pale pink fluorite from the Glengowla mine. And we've only found out recently, actually, that if you shine a powerful enough fluorescent light at these, they do actually fluoresce in a pale lilac. Almost every other locality in Ireland where there's fluorite, it doesn't actually fluoresce. Okay, so we did know there were quite a few localities already in the Galway granite, but they were minor, they were quite small, crystals weren't very large. A fairly recent discovery was one at a place called Lettermuckoo, at the quarry there, and that's one of the specimens there. It's quite small. These are only sort of a couple of millimeters across, but these are quite nice purple octahedra of fluorite. There was also a number of mines like the Invrin mine, and I'll just go on to this here now. So fluorite localities that are associated with the Galway granite. So they're not just found within the granite, they're found in the surrounding limestones as well. So as you see, 31 localities have been discovered so far. Well, actually, to this point, I suppose this would make 32 in the granite. Interestingly enough, most of them have an approximate north-south orientation. In the granite, this word gang here, it just means the mineral that they're most associated with. It's a mining term. It was basically the stuff that was thrown away, the gang. It just was not useful. So usually an ore is made up, or sorry, an economic body is made up of the ore, which you want, and the gang, which you don't want. So in the granite, this is usually quartz, and it's associated with things like molybdenum, tungsten, lead, iron, copper. And there was some fluorite mined, as you can see, in the 1800s. In the limestone, there's a few there as well. Again, the orientation tends to be approximately north-south. The main gang mineral this time, however, is calcite. That's shouldn't be unexpected because it's in limestone. But this has a different set of associated elements like lead, zinc, copper, iron, and silver. A couple of mines there producing about 50 tons at a time. And there's some those old mines are located in the Burren or around the Burren. Okay. I could hear myself there. Has someone got a microphone on there? I could hear myself just for a second. Anyway, okay. Larkins Quarry. This is in a place called Shanafistine. That's the townland it's in. The current people operating the quarry are called Stephen and Jimmy. They've inherited the quarry. And they were producing granite and dolerite, and it was mostly they were blasting it and crushing it. They got a nice contract with the local wind farm, which they were providing aggregate for. However, back in December 2015, they did a blast and they just saw this purple stuff everywhere, and they were worried actually that it was going to cause a problem with their contract, that it just wasn't going to be good enough material to be crushing down. And I'm not sure whether Keith called in or whether he was passing or whatever, but Keith Gagan, the guy from Mogul Mine, had a look at it, realized that it was fluorite and that it had some kind of sort of potential for monetary gain or resale. So a few specimens started to appear in 2016, 2017. A couple of smallish dealers came in and got a few specimens and started putting them on the market. And that's when both myself and Mike started seeing these things appear on the internet on various sites. And we thought, well, this is very special. We haven't seen anything like this in Ireland before. And so we got in touch with Stephen and Jimmy. So we first visited in August 2017, and we chatted to the lads, and they were basically wanting to know whether their solid granite, the stuff which is their main income, whether it extended further and they could actually do further blasts into the quarry without coming across any sort of weak areas, which just wouldn't be profitable for them. So we agreed that we would do a geophysical survey in December 2017. You can just see that's myself there and Mike Sweeney, and we got the geophysical equipment out and we're running a number of lines across the quarry. They then took us to their workshop, and as you see, they had already started washing specimens and just laying them out. So they had a workshop with just tables and tables absolutely covered with specimens of fluorite and the various other minerals that they were picking. Actually, they had a dustbin full of galena because they didn't really, want that too much. So this is just me, by the way, driving away after the very first visit that we did in August 2017, after they'd given me that, just to sort of give an idea of the type of specimens that may be produced. This is obviously this is blast damage, pretty big cube of fluorite with some lovely color variations from purple in the center and got these lovely sort of green tips at the corners. We haven't got around to publishing anything till now because we had to keep going back. The problem is with the quarry is a developing thing. You have to observe it, especially when they're blasting it, and you get different faces produced at different times. So we could generally build up a picture of the geology that was there. So our agreement with the Larkins was that we would publish something on the geology of the quarry and about the fluorites as a sort of partially as a promotion, but partially because they were very interested in learning about their quarry. So just going to that location where Shanafistin is, I've just put it in a sort of geological context here. And on the left here is a map that a number of you might be familiar with, which is we've got the Iapta Suture coming through here. We've got the various origins, including the Caledonian and the Scandinavian origins up here, and all these rocks associated, especially in the Ireland and Britain, are known as the sort of Caledonian rocks. They've left a mark on the geology of Ireland. In fact, there's a number of what we call these lineaments, some of which divide up what were small microcontinents that were all brought together in the culmination of the Caledonian orogeny. Associated with this was the intrusion of granite bodies. So all the red things on here are these Caledonian aged granite bodies. So we've got the Donegal granite, Leinster granite, Carlingford, some of the Ox Mountains one, and we've got the Galway granite complex here as well. So in here, this yellow mark here is the specific granite called the Shanafistin granite, in which the quarry is located. You can see it's not too far from Galway city. And I'll come back to what these other little lines are later. Okay, here's a close-up of the geology again. Here's our location, Connemara. Here's the yellow, the Shanafistin granite, which is in yellow. We also have the older, what's known as the porphyritic megacrystic granite. It's known often as the Kilkieran Pluton. And we've got the Calafinish granite going across here as well. What I do apologize for the spelling of dikes. We published this for an American, or they're American publishers, and they spell dikes with an I, not a Y. I have changed that in the text. The other thing to take note of is this large area of faulting that runs down the western flank of the Shanafistin granite, and it's known as the Shanafistin fault zone. And its significance I will bring up later. Getting a little bit closer, it's not a particularly big quarry. It's got a stream running along the southern margin. We've got the R372, the road running down here, which pretty much parallels a well-known fault, part of that Shanafistin fault zone. But we think that fault zone extends further enough into the quarry. It might even extend further out as well. All I've marked on here is in the quarry, there's also a dolerite, which I said they were using as well, for some of it for aggregate. I've written on here the porphyry. There's a dike that also runs this way across the quarry. And what I've written there is main zone, and I'll talk about that in a minute. That's the main area of mineralization. So down into the quarry, you've got the northern face. This tends to be more weathered than the southern face, but this is the one where we concentrate a lot of our efforts, because this is where that was producing a large amount of the crystals that we were collecting. You can see in this case, they've done a blast, and this is unfortunately what happens sometimes when they do a blast. It basically covers the whole face, and you don't get to see much. The good thing is we got into this area and this area because at later visits, this was all blasted as well, and we couldn't really see much in here either. And this is the southern face. Just to mention, going back here, that area there, which I'll show you pictures of later, is the dolerite dike crossing over on this side. It's very heavily weathered. If we go to the southern face, the dike's here. It's still weathered, but nowhere near as badly. And you can see there's a lot of very competent granite on this side. Right, so going back to this, the northern face, I split these up into different regions, depending on the way they looked. And this is something that I often do when I go into a quarry. I try and break up the quarry into different zones that I can then investigate in more detail and see what relevance they actually have to the overall geological picture. So you can see I've just gone with color in this case, the pink zone over here, a gray zone here, the dike in between, And what I mentioned before, there was this main zone. That's the main area of mineralization. What I've written there is just lead and zinc. Lead and zinc minerals actually increase with depth along this area. Okay, so this pink zone is a pink-colored granite or granodiorite. Now, if you probably took it and took a fresh sample, it's quite gray, but it just gives an overall pink color to it. And that's probably because there's been more alteration in this granite, and more of the feldspars have been degraded, and they give a characteristic pink color. There's also quite a lot of pegmatitic material or pegmatites. These are very coarse grained, in this case, granitic rocks, mostly quartz and feldspar and alkali feldspar. There's also these interesting, what we'd call igneous hydrothermal bodies. They're not always just as veins, they could be pods as well, and they consist of potassium feldspar quartz, but they have molybdenite mineralization in them. And molybdenite mineralization has been studied all across the Galway granite complex. It was what caused a lot of this controversy over potentially mining deposits in the Galway granite region. But it's relatively minor. But what it does give us, it gives us an opportunity to date the rocks, because molybdenite is really good for getting radiogenic dates from it. The other thing we see in the pink zone, we get veins. These contain mainly epidote. They also have fluorite, there's calcite, and these ones have really broad alteration halos. And occasionally they contain things like lead, zinc, iron, and copper sulfides. There's also lake quartz veins that run across the whole thing. And I'll give you just a couple of examples of the sort of things to look at. There's the pink zone. Hopefully everybody can see that it gives a general pinkish appearance. And it is bounded, that pink zone, by the dike that's here. So what do we see? So on this left-hand image, we've actually got a pegmatite running through here. So there's a coarse quartz and feldspar body running through the granite. But we also have these other veins going through, and this is mostly made from epidote, fluorite, and calcite. So these sort of veins going through it. And you can see these veins really clearly here that are just almost entirely made from epidote. That's the green color. And they have very broad alteration zones around them. So it means as the fluid was passing through here, it was interacting with the granite on both sides. Going on to these bodies that also contain the molybdenite, you can see there's a bit of sort of relatively unaltered granite in there, but these are these coarse quartz feldspar bodies that contain the molybdenite. There's little specks of molybdenite all the way through this. And in some of them, we get quite large pyrites, up to 1 centimeter across, but they're very weathered. Right, so what kind of minerals do we get in these? We do get fluorite when these open up, and this is a good example, one of the best examples actually, of the fluorite we get. You can see they form beautiful octahedrons. So that's this shape that's here. And they're associated with the epidote, which is the green mineral that you can see all around this. And there's also a white mineral there, which is known as adularian orthoclase. So it's a potassium feldspar, particularly pure version, that's often just called adularia. Here's another specimen on this side. You can see the hosting granite on either side. See epidote, bundles of epidote in there, and you see lots of these octahedra of fluorite. They're quite simple. They're generally pale purple to deep dark purple, and they are always octahedra. So don't worry about the formula that I put up there. We can also get reasonable specimens of epidote out of this area as well. So there's a specimen there. That field of view is about sort of 5 centimeters across. So we get nice sprays of epidote in there. And just to show, this is a single crystal of epidote. It's actually quite yellowish, but that I can show is only 1 millimeter in length. So that's quite small. But to give you a better idea of how we see those sort of yellowy epidotes, they're actually what forming the sort of pale yellowy green spots in here. So this particular rock here is made from, again, octahedra of fluorite. The white on here are much larger adularian orthoclase, which I've just of this adularia. It's not something we see a huge amount of in this country. Right, so moving along from the pink zone, we have the Dyke, and it is the approximate boundary between these two zones that I've delineated, so the pink and the grey zone. It's really heavily weathered on that northern face, and it possibly splits. We've possibly got, there's a bit of granite in there, and we've got splitting of the Dyke on either side here, but it's really rotten, and there's not a lot you can get out of it. On this northern face, it's a bit better. But you can see it's actually got quite a heavy sort of fabric to it, which led some people to originally postulate that this actually was the Shanafistine fault running through, and that this was some kind of fault rock. But it's very clearly a dolerite running through there, and we can actually get some small specimens of epidote from there, but only really for the micro collectors. Right, moving on to the grey zone. Again, this is a granite or granitite, but this is more grey coloured. There's less these pegmatite bodies in there. There is a large porphyry dike. I showed you that in the map earlier that runs across this. We hadn't so far in the stuff that we'd actually seen on the face come across any of these molybdenite bodies. But instead of epidote veins that contain some fluorite, we've got fluorite veins. We also do get some quartz veins, which are just monomineralic. In other words, they just have quartz, and you get some really nice quartz specimens. Feldspar is not potassium feldspar. It is a sodium feldspar. So it's the sodium end of the plagioclase feldspar. That's albite. We get chlorite, which we don't see in the pink zone, but again, we do get various sulfides of lead, zinc, copper, iron. Mineralization increases away from the dolerite dike towards the main zone. So just to give you an idea, this is a very sort of grey looking granite. You can see a drill hole there before the guys did some blasting. You can see some small sort of thin pegmatitic or apolitic veins running through there. But then we have these, this is just a fluorite vein. There's no associated with it. It's just a fluorite vein with a typical purple color to it. And this thing here is just the contact where the porphyry comes through the granite. It looks a bit messy and all over the place. And this rock looks very, very fine grained, but I did look at it under a microscope, and you can see phenocrysts in it, which does describe it as a porphyry. It's what a lot of authors would have just called a felsite. It's just a feldspar, alkali feldspar rich rock that runs through there. Right, just to look at a couple of the things that you just see in the field and give an example of, it's not that easy to get anything out of here. This is on a huge boulder. You can see there's a lovely face here, fluorite cubes. There's some calcite in there as well, but there's no way you could actually collect that without just tearing the thing to pieces. These are sort of blocks that we just see sitting on the side, and you can see this one has a beautiful cube of fluorite. But the other thing you can notice is these fractures in there. A lot of the specimens are affected by blast damage. So because these guys, it's not their job to be delicately collecting minerals, it's their job to blast out the granite for either crushing or making into, they've actually been doing a lining cobbles and things like that there as well. So another dimension stone. So blast damage is very common. It's amazing that we've actually got so many good crystals out of here at all. So that's the sort of thing you see in the field. Now here's a couple of the specimens. Just to say, if there's any specimens that don't have any names by them as far as a photographer's collection, it's in my own collection, it's my own photographs. And I've tried to put in as many of those as I can. So on this side, we've got nice cubes. This is typical of the grey zone. there's a lot of cubic crystals here, and intergrown in this case with some really nice sort of doubly terminated prisms of quartz. On this side, there's something else going on here. We have what were octahedra of fluorite. They're now completely coated in chlorite, and then some cubic fluorite with various zones has grown on top of that. We also get more complex crystals as well. These are too complex to talk about. They're mostly octahedra. They've got some various modifications as well. But again, this is with sort of prismatic quartz and green chlorite. So again, these aren't huge. This specimen is only about 6 centimeters, 7 centimeters across, but still very nice. And here's another one. There's some very complex stuff going on here. This is one of my specimens, again, about 7 or 8 centimeters across, and these are mostly octahedra that have been modified. So the gray zone is where we find the majority of the quartz crystals at this locality. There's a couple of mite specimens here. There are some fabulous specimens that come out, but we often find that a couple of the quartz points have already been knocked off. So photographing it from the side actually makes a better job of it sometimes, because you don't see where the broken points have come from. But these things, the quartz crystals can sort of get up to 7 or 8 centimeters in length. So pretty big. It's just a nice one because these have little chlorite inclusions on one side and then they're fairly colorless on the other side. This is an example just in the field, as where I'm just sort of standing on a block here, and you can see there's been a vein. It's got fluorite, which is the purple color, and quartz crystals, which are actually doubly terminated, and they don't seem to be attached to anything previously, and they were just lying there, and the whole thing has been coated with green chlorite. Let's say that sort of thing is just left sitting around the quarry. Okay, we also do get some pretty good micro minerals there, and these can get up to sort of quite nice hand specimen size covered in some of these crystals. Like this is a classic twinned albite crystal. So this is this sodium feldspar that I told you about. This is a titanium oxide called anatase, quite nice sort of octahedra in itself. This is hematite, and that's associated with these little balls of muscovite. And the muscovite on here, you can see there's a quartz crystal and muscovite are growing in them. These are all pretty small. This one's the largest one at about sort of 2 to 3 millimeters across, whereas some of these are incredibly small. And this is what the chlorite looks like close up. You get these what are known as sort of chlorite worms forming. The last one there is just an interesting calcium titanium oxide. This is titanite. Okay, so that's the gray zone. So we haven't really moved on to the main zone yet. We're going to do that now. So the cavities and the fractures that we saw in the gray zone are now much larger, and they form in what we call step fractures, which I'll show you an example of in a minute. And those now have large open spaces, which when lined with crystals, we'd often call them vugs. And those crystals, especially the fluorites, can reach up to 8 centimeters. I got a feeling there is a possibility that there have been ones that may have been hit by blast because they're so big that may have been 10, 12 centimeters across the cubes themselves. I mentioned earlier the amount of sulfides in the main zone. They increase with depth. We've got a vertical zoning. So we have found specimens that have a green color in the uppermost parts of the northern face. We actually haven't found any green in the southern face whatsoever. And well, that's what I say, there is lateral zoning as well. So it seems that as they've moved across the quarry, even though they've sort of had to dig deeper in there, there have been some very interesting finds come out. And we get a huge variety between both in the vertical zoning and the lateral zoning of this main zone area. I say it's very difficult to recover good large specimens because of the blasting. They get a lot of fractures in them. So here's the main zone, and you can see what the guys have actually done after one of these blasts is they decided that they would sort of get the digger in here and just basically dig out as much as they could and try and recover stuff. It's not the best way of recovering fragile specimens, but as I say, they still managed to get a reasonable amount out of there. It doesn't look like much. You don't see any very large cavities, but when you get closer, and I'll show you a couple of pictures of them. Actually, on this side, this is the northern face here. I don't know if you can see, there's a, just down by the water there, there's a hole. And this is one of these cavities. And one of the earliest bigger specimens actually came out of that. Whoops, let's go back a second. One of the larger specimens came out of that, and there's another hole in there. And you can see a few of these as you sort of get your eye in. But this is this sort of main fracture zone in the granite. Yeah, so this is what we see. So on the top surface here, here's one of these sort of stepped fractures. It's basically, instead of just going in a sort of straight line like here, we've got it stepping out to the side, and you get then these much larger areas into which these crystals can form. You can see these cubes of fluorite here. These are sort of greenish cubes. The other thing we do tend to notice is we've got a general zoning from the grayish fluorite at the outside, purple, which could be octahedra. Then we get green cubes. And then on top of, in this particular area, on these green cubes, we often get smaller colorless cubes. But as I'll show you later, it's even more complex than that. One of the problems we did encounter on some of the upper levels, if the local groundwater, which is quite boggy and acidic in that area, has managed to penetrate into some of these large cavities, then the crystals tend to be etched. So they, instead of having lovely lustrous faces like these ones over this side, which were protected beautifully by this mud, these ones had acidic groundwater in them, and it started to sort of etch at the faces of the fluorite. You can see these would be very large cubes with what we call beveled corners on them. All right. So some of the specimens from the main zone. These are a couple of mics. These are slightly etched on the left-hand side. They would have come from somewhere similar to this. And this is a pretty big specimen. I'm trying to think, it's about sort of 16 centimeters high. So these are on edge about 6 to 7 centimeters, each one of these cubes. So there's a lovely, what we used to, we were calling a sort of ethereal quality to these. They almost have pastel colors in them, a bit of green, a bit of purple. And actually, when you view them in artificial light, they tend to look quite pale blue, which is very nice. Here's another largish specimen of Mike's. This is a sort of what we call a stepped habit. You can see the stepping of these cubes. So lots of multiple growth faces of cubes. These are step faces. Another thing you can actually see on this one is these little circular patches. They're not actually sort of contact damage or blast damage, and I'll mention those in a minute. Right. Not many of these came out. This is sort of fairly recent thing. So I think it was the last time I was up, I grabbed this particular one. And I actually have it here, but it doesn't really show that well unless you light it properly. My son has named this the Tesseract. So if anybody of you are fans of the Marvel Universe, you'll know what the Tesseract is. And actually in geometry, a Tesseract tends to be a cube within a cube. And this, even though it's slightly offset, this pretty much has a cube within a cube, but it has this lovely deep inky blue color. And I've seen only one of, and this was in a photo that was produced by Green Mountain Minerals, who are the main dealers for Shanafistine specimens at the moment. I did say they get green as well. So these are a couple of the finest sort of green specimens to come out of the quarry. This one I actually got as payment for undertaking the geophysical survey. There's a little bit of damage on it, but it's a rather nice specimen. And you can see these beautiful sort of purple centers on each one of these green cubes. And that is actually where these cubes have directly overgrown a purple octahedron. You can see the purple octahedron in this particular one, just inside there. And that is pretty much the color. I haven't done any enhancement on those or anything. We also get sulfites, as I said, and the further we went down, the more sulfide there was. And I mean, here's just an example. This is pretty much just a lump of galena. As you can see, pretty big. That sort of brownish patch on there is some sphalerite, and that whitish one there is a bit of fluoride. There are some galena specimens that have come out there, but they're not quite your Mogul Mine quality. They do have well-developed crystal faces, but in this case, they have a coating of lead carbonate, the sericite, on the top of them. And so far, we've only found a few also decent-sized chalcopyrite crystals. This is a disphenoidal, a very sort of bent disphenoidal crystal of chalcopyrite, as you can see, sitting with some nice octahedral fluorite and some pretty massive calcite that's in there as well. Okay, that all said and done, they're nice specimens, and they could just about be classed as world class just on their own, but they certainly have some unique features as well, which makes collectors want them more. These are the fact that we can see multiple phases of growth, recorded as I showed you, that one with the green cube overgrowing the purple octahedra, but they also contain things that we call phantoms. They have concentric zones, they have sector zones, there's a variety of colors. And I've also included the discoidal inclusions. They don't necessarily make them aesthetic, but it certainly makes them interesting and unique. Now, this specimen over here doesn't look great on the outside, but this is a cleavage face of a large fluorite. You can see the center of it was an octahedron, or this is part of an octahedron. This contains lots of little purple concentric zones. On the outside of that is an area of green, and that's followed by an area of sort of pale blue. And you can see that all that is forming, or was forming, a sort of cube shape around it. Okay, so just to mention, I'm saying we have lots of sort of these phantoms, overgrowths, concentric zoning. Everything's based around the cubic system in fluorite. It crystallizes, and that's why we often see cubes, but also why we see octahedra. So this is just giving you an example. The green thing here is an octahedron. You see the red is a cube, and the purple bit is a dodecahedron. And if you just sort of take that body in the middle, and I've given colors to the typical faces that you would see on crystals, and these numbers on them, don't worry too much about those. These are called the Miller indices of the crystal faces. But the point is that we often see either single ones, like we get single octahedra, we get just cubes, but often we get multiple faces associated with each one of these cubic forms. So you wouldn't see this in too many other localities. Actually, I don't know any localities where you see it this clearly. So here's a elongated cube. It's not quite a real cube here, but you see in this case, it has an octahedron inside it. You can see the octahedron extends out into the side here where cubes have also grown over it. You have some concentric zoning. You see these lovely sort of lines of purple. And also there's little patches of green actually here as well, here and there. But also then we've got these purple zones around the edges. And actually, when you look at them in detail, they're angled across there. There's also sometimes some ones you get at the corners, might see that better, another one, but these are actually angled. And if we went back to this, there are actually faces, which are part of the dodecahedron. So this one has an octahedron, which is a green one, has a cube, which is a red one overgrown, and these little thin margins that go around here, these conform to dodecahedral faces. This is something that none of us had really seen before, where we've got octahedra that are overgrown by cubes. If you get a certain relationship between the dimensions of the two, you end up with what the Green Mountain Minerals started calling Celtic crosses. And you can actually see why from this specimen. This is an octahedra. In this case, it's unusual in that it's coated with chlorite and then overgrown by cubes at its the apices, and it gives this remarkable look. Unfortunately, they can't tell us where this went to, who it was sold to. This one, however, you can't really see the octahedra there. The octahedra has been overgrown by lots of small cubes, which give it a stepped appearance, but it definitely has, again, these larger cubes grown at the apices of the octahedra. And this one was at Crystal Classics. I'm not sure if that did go for sale at some point. I certainly wouldn't be buying it because I can't afford it. Right, phantoms. So instead of just overgrowth, the phantom is where a crystal has continued to grow, but has left behind a trace like a color zone that it had there before. It could have left a fluid inclusion trail. And it just, you get almost a ghostly appearance of the previous form of the mineral inside the crystal, if the crystal is still translucent. So we've got some lovely examples here. Start with the central one because it's the easiest one to sort of explain. So we've got a phantom of an octahedra in the center here. We have slightly green overgrowth on these things. Now we don't know to what system. Then we appear to have a dodecahedron phantom going around here. Then obviously we've got the growth of the cube. We've got these dodecahedral bands going on, and actually these ones on the corner are octahedral. So there's a hell of a lot going on in each one of these. This one's quite unusual in the fact that the cube almost exactly matches the dimensions of the octahedra. And this one has a beautiful green color over the purple. And what we notice with a lot of specimens, as you see on the one on the right, is that green coloration often is associated with these stepped octahedral corners. So you get stepped corners and they tend to fall away like this, and they're associated with green. So this one's a little more complicated. We've definitely got an octahedron in the center there somewhere. Then we've got a very rough outline of color zoning there, and then we've got the lovely green tips. So you can see why collectors, these are quite unique and they're loving it. They can get even more complicated. Again, I've just got, this is a relatively small crystal, it's only a sort of a couple of centimeters across, but I included this because this one has, there's a octahedral phantom in the center. We've also got those sort of rings going around there. We seem to have a dodecahedral shape somewhere in there, but also we've got these squares or rectangles of a sort of bluish color. I don't know how easy that is to see there. But if you move on to this one, and this is one of Mike's sort of treasures that he's got, these crystals, you start to see they developed a very distinct sector, which on these ones have now sort of become what we call checkerboard zoning. So they have these extraordinary rectangular dark blue patches, and they relate to the dodecahedral form. You can also see the faces are beveled to the dodecahedral form. So it's a cube with these bevels on it. They again have these stepped corners, and that's associated with the green color. And I can show you in the center of there is an octahedral phantom as well. So extremely complicated, but fascinating crystals. I mentioned earlier when I showed you that that specimen in the sort of muddy vug, the green crystals, which overgrow the purple octahedrons, they have often a later growth of cubes on top of them. Here's one of Mike's specimens here showing a sort of quite limey green color. And the cubes themselves are overgrown with this colorless to purple small cubes here. And I've just put this one in here. I was allowed to just walk out of the quarry with this one. The guys were very, very nice, but I mean, it's going to take a lot of work. And this is, I'm showing you this because this is sort of typical, the sort of things you might find and why it's difficult to get large specimen out of there. Here's a big blast fracture that runs all the way through the specimen, which I'm going to have to heal up. There's some of this quite stubborn mud, which forms these pale patches on there. Not so easy to get off. Some of it is sort of pretty much well adhered onto that. And what you can also see is there's plenty of damage where this has been in contact with other crystals. So maybe not so easy to see, but that's quite badly damaged up there. So I've got that specimen here if anybody wants to see it afterwards. Mentioned those disc-like inclusions. So it caused a lot of, consternation to start with as to what these things are, but we had them analyzed. I analyzed them on a Raman spectrometer, and they were also analyzed on an XRF somewhere as well. And yeah, they were found to actually be fluorite. So even though these discs, and when you zoom in on them, they're formed of sort of spherical radial of fluorite fibers, we weren't quite sure what they were doing there, and it's not something we see very often. Some of them actually can be, I don't know if that one's showing it there, can be a bit iridescent too. The current theory is that these were actually the former site of a fluid, probably a hydrocarbon that was beading on the face of the crystal. We often get hydrocarbons associated with hydrothermal mineral deposits. And as the fluorite continued to grow and the hydrocarbon was dispelled, the fluorite then grew in the space that was left behind. And actually, sometimes it's not fully filling the space, and that's what gives it its iridescence, because we get thin layers of air in those cavities as well. Right. I won't dwell too much on it. So what we found out is we're in the Galway Granite Complex, which has a range of ages from about 410 to 385 million years. And there's lots and lots of papers you can look at for that. The Shanafestine granite itself was dated at 385 million years, but molybdenite from those sort of quartz feldspar bodies that I showed you from the quarry gave a date of 401 million years. So Martin Feely published that last year, and he postulated that it was actually a stoked block. You actually have a number of them in the Shanafestine granite where where the Shanafestine granite was being emplaced, and blocks of the overlying Kilkieran pluton, or that porphyritic megakristic granite, had fallen into the Shanafestine granite. That's one thought. The other thought is we are right next to this Shanafestine fault zone, and it could be that these are fault blocks that have pretty much interleaved with the Shanafestine granite. So it seems that what we're actually dealing with, although it maps within the Shanafestine granite, is a part of the overlying or adjacent Kilkieran pluton. The dolerite and the porphyry dikes, they may be associated with each other, although they have quite different orientations. There's a dike swarm that's been described by Paul Moore, and that dates around 305 million years. So that gives us a sort of a general outline of the main rocks that we find in the quarry. It's a bit more difficult to try and work out when the fluorite was deposited, because it's a very complex system. So we know we've got these north-northeast, south-southwest trending fractures, such as the Shanafestine fault zone, which is that labeled there, SHFZ. See the Shanafestine granite, we're of course on the western margin of it. But a recent paper by John Walsh and others last year had a look at similar oriented fractures within the Burren, and they postulated that it was these fractures were generated by movement, what's often called transpressional movement, between these large lineaments that I pointed out before, due to the Variscan compression from the south. And so that these activated these fractures. And so it's possible that this is at least when some of the mineralization may have occurred associated with the Shanafistine fault zone. We can't be sure. Julie Minouche back in 1997 thought that the mineralization was actually associated, not the mineralization in our quarry, but the general fluorite mineralization in the Galway Granite complex was associated with mid-Triassic continental rifting, basically the sort of proto-Atlantic opening back about 231 million years ago. So we really don't know the age of these things. And just going back to that, obviously we'd like to do further studies to look into the origins of these deposits. Now, just going on the style of the mineralization itself, myself and Mike split the styles of mineralization that we see into the quarry into two types. That's excluding the molybdenite mineralization, but we're looking just at the fluorite mineralization. So just a list of some minerals that are present there and the differences that we see, and we call these type 1 and type 2. Here's in the quarry, this is a type 1 vein. You can see it's mostly epidote. There's fluorite running through there. There's patches here of this Adularian orthoclase, and quite often they have a late filling of calcite. There's actually a large pyrite in that one as well. But they're very, very simple fluorite crystals, all octahedra. And as I say, it's associated with epidote. If we go on to what we're calling the type 2 mineralization, we have all this variety of crystal forms. They're associated with chlorite and not epidote. And there are some similarities, but we've got other ones like the feldspar we have is this Adularian orthoclase. On this side, it's albite in these ones. So there are definite differences between the two styles of mineralization. Just go back to that. There were a couple of theories that were bandied around. One was that that the type 1 mineralization just was early mineralization that even happened on the other side of the quarry, but that somehow this system was cut off geologically, maybe by the Dyke, and that this system that has the type 2 mineralization continued to develop with more hydrothermal fluids being dumped. I think it's more likely the pink zone and the gray zone are somehow different systems developed in different areas and now interleaved by the local fault zone. Just to mention again, this on the styles of mineralization is what can actually tell us. Well, there's been a number of studies that have done that suggests that the crystal form of fluorite changes mainly due to temperature, but I mean, it's a very complex system, and it could be to do with the fluid composition, oxygen fugacity, all sorts of different things that make up a hydrothermal system. But the simple way of describing it is high temperature octahedron, moderate temperature dodecahedron, and low temperature cube. And there's been some studies that octahedron only form above 375 degrees, and cubes, I can't remember if it was about below 130 or something like this, but that was just in one particular system. It varies hugely from area to area, but that's the general sort of thing. And of course, we can see that, if you like, we've got an octahedron, then a dodecahedron, then a cube, which gives us a sort of a nice story there, but there are so many other small complications along the way. Okay, so yeah, what happens next? What are we going to do about this place? I just need to warn everybody, there is no collecting allowed. These guys have a deal with this Minerals, and it's exclusive partnership between the two. They get all the material, and certainly nobody else is allowed into the quarry. We were lucky enough to get in when we did. The quarry will continue to be worked for aggregate because that is their main source of income. Even though they can sell the minerals for a reasonable amount of money and they can buy bits of equipment with it, it really isn't the main driving financial source that they have. Expect further finds. Well, perhaps we're hoping that we will see some new stuff as they continue. I don't know if it's just my screen or whatever, and I can show people in a minute, but one of the last things I found, oh, it doesn't show up very well on the screen. Now it's coming up in the wrong colors, is a specimen which looked like it came from a cube that was about at least 10 centimeters across. And it was pale blue and in towards the center, sorry, sort of inky blue towards the center, and a sort of aquamarine blue towards the corners. And that could suggest there'd be some fantastic finds in the future. We also expect as it goes deeper, if they do manage to go deeper, which actually means a lot of pumping the water, which not so great, that better sulfite specimens would be found. So we might get some nice galenas and sphalerite out of that. Okay, this one I didn't show you. This is probably the most expensive specimen to come out of the quarry so far. This has been sold to some of the premier world collectors. That's Jim and Gail Spann over in the US. You see again, Jeff Scoville, who's the top photographer, took these images. And you can see this remarkable fluorite crystal that seems to bring together a lot of what we've been talking about. On the left-hand side, we've got a phantom of an octahedra in the center. We've got these cubes growing on the apices of that octahedra, but then we've got this crystal, really translucent crystal, beautiful thing with very well developed checkerboard zoning on the sides of it. And again, these sort of stepped edges, this isn't damage, this is actual stepped edges on this specimen. I don't know how much it sold for, but I've been told it's a lot. That specimen is 10 centimeters across, not the cube, but the specimen. All right, just to say that this work is now published in the latest issue of the Mineralogical Record. Unfortunately, we didn't make the cover because that Australian gold find where they found those huge pieces of gold in Australia made the cover, unfortunately. But we have the second article in there and the longest article that's in there. So you can find out more there. And obviously none of this would have happened without, this is Jimmy on the left, Stephen on the right, carrying a reasonably large piece of fluorite there, and Shog the dog. With that, I'll say thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions.